Okay, so this morning I'm going to speak on God's rescue plan. Let me get water ready. God's rescue plan. Okay, God's rescue plan. That's the title of today's message. And I'm just going to focus on one word of God's rescue plan. I could have chosen many words. I could have chosen salvation. I could have chosen grace. I could have chosen love, like we were singing about this morning. I could have spoken about Jesus. But this morning, my word is covenant. And God affirms his rescue plan by the covenant that he has with his people. Now, Leon, a couple of years ago, did an amazing message on covenant. And if you can get your hands on it, it's really good. And I put these little bits of paper up, not this one, but just to talk about, just to quickly mention some of God's covenants. That one fell down. And it's over a 4,000-year span till the time we get to Jesus under the plug there. It's 0 BC. So it starts from Adam and works our way all the way through to Jesus. And there are 5 covenants in the Old Testament, and then we get to Jesus in the New Testament. So going back to 4,000 years BC, before Christ, we've got Adam. And the covenant with Adam and Eve was one of obedience. That if you're obedient, you could stay in this place of blessedness. And unfortunately, we know that they weren't obedient, and they disobeyed and were put out of the Garden of Eden. And then roughly 1,000 years later, we've got Noah, and God made a covenant with Noah in Genesis 9, and God promised to be faithful. And he gave us the rainbow. I don't know if we got, yes, I've just put a little picture of each of the covenants there just to give a pictorial representation. So he gave us a rainbow just to remind us that God is faithful to us. And then about another 1,000 years later, we've got Abraham, the Abrahamic covenant, where God made a promise with Abraham that he was going to make him a great nation, and that he was going to bless him and make him a great nation. And then about 500 years later is Moses. I'm really going through these quickly, aren't I? There's Moses. And with Moses came the law. And by the way, we've just gone out of Genesis now. And Moses wrote the first 5 books in the Bible. So we've got Moses. Moses gave the law, and we've got the Mosaic covenant. And then about another 500 years later, I'm really not doing your message justice. But about 500 years later, we had the covenant with David. And through David, God promised that his throne would last forever. That through his lineage, that we'll have the Messiah, which is where we come to Jesus. So, like I said, Leon's message was really good, and if you get a chance to listen to his message on the covenants that God has with his people, I really encourage you to do so. Right, now to my part of the message. So, let's just start with the definition of a covenant. And if we go to our faithful friend Google, Google defines covenant as a formal binding agreement or promise between 2 or more parties, usually in writing or with a seal. So if we have a covenant, it's an agreement, it's a promise between 2 people, it's a pledge that we can have to make a covenant. Covenant is such a strong word that it even divides the Bible into 2. You've got the Old Testament and the New Testament. And another word for testament is covenant. So you've got the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. There are 2 Greek words that we have for covenant. And one is called syntheke and the other is called diatheke. How's that for my Greek? Okay, we got them on the board there. That's great. Santhike is when we have an equal partnership or an equal relationship with each other between two equal parties. So it's like when you have a business relationship, two people put in the same amount of money, or a marriage, we're equal partners with each other. But then the other word in Greek for covenant is diatheke. And diatheke is when you have two, it's a one-sided agreement. It's unequal parties, that one has everything to give and the other one doesn't have. It's like a will and testament or an inheritance. It's something that is given that we don't really deserve. And in our relationship with Jesus, He's the one who is stronger and His word is more binding than ours. So in the covenant relationship that we have with God, it's more the second one. So what does a covenant look like? And how are covenants done? Just trying to see if there's time. How are covenants done? How are they done in Bible times? What do they look like today? Man has known blood covenants right from the beginning of time, and they're very evident in the Bible. And they are known in one form or another across the world. And whether you're Christian or not a Christian, most cultures will know about a covenant. Okay, does anybody know this gentleman here on the screen? Here he comes, hopefully. This guy here. Does anybody know Henry Morton Stanley? Some of the missionaries might know him. When I say who he is, I'm sure you'll get him. He's the guy who's famed to have said, Dr. Livingstone, I presume. Okay, some of you would have heard that. So Stanley set out to find Livingstone, and he had to go dangerously through Central Africa when he was on his exploration. And at one point, he had no choice but to make a blood covenant with a tribe that he came across to be able to pass and get through. And he swapped his goat for the spear. And he was like, my goat was much more precious to me than this spear. What am I going to do with it? Put it in my umbrella rack when I get home or something. But little did he know that this spear had such representation that when he came to other tribes, that they basically just gave him a free pass as soon as they saw that spear. He would just show them the spear, and they knew who this chief was because he was so revered in the area that they gave him free pass through, and he managed to find his way through to Dr. Livingstone. Now, in making a covenant, there are 8 basic steps, and we're going to fly through these steps. And for the note takers, I've got the steps up on the screen. We're going to go through step by step, so you don't have to write them all down now. But while we're going through these steps, I'm going to use 3 examples. And these 3 examples are basically here in the church. We're going to act out a covenant, which is going to be quite fun. Got my fun shirt on. I had Eugene saying I'm looking quite dangerous with my haircut at the moment, but anyway, I've got my fun shirt. So we're going to act out the 2 tribes, and let's just divide them down the middle. So we've got this tribe here, and we've got this tribe here. And the reason for this covenant that these 2 tribes are wanting to make is because there's an enemy that's outside, that's wanting to steal our children, that's wanting to kill our men, and that's wanting to destroy our property. And doesn't that sound like John 10:10, where the enemy wants to steal, kill, and destroy? The second example, which may have fell off, is our example with Abram. So we'll use one example from the Old Testament. So we've got Abraham. And then the third example, we'll always tie in Jesus. You've got to bring Jesus into every message. And so let's see how all this fits together. Okay, so step 1 are these pre-ceremony actions. also could be like the dating phase in a relationship. The parties would weigh up the advantages and disadvantages of being together. They would see the benefits and the blessings versus the personal cost that it's going to take of going into this covenant. And fortunately, as the two tribes here, you guys decide that you're going to make a covenant, because it's much stronger to be together than it is than being apart. And isn't that like life in general? I mean, I can look around now and just pick out friends who I know have walked with me in my life and have helped me as I've gone through, walked through some of the issues and challenges that we have in life. The next one is with Abraham. And the covenant with Abraham is recorded in Genesis chapters 12 to 18. And although the covenant took place in chapter 12, God stopped making some reasons for this covenant. And we read that in chapter 12, verses 1 to 7. And I'll just highlight, I won't read the whole passage that's here. But God said that you will go from your country to a place I will show you, and I will make you a great nation. Abraham was Abram, as he was known then, was about 75 when him and Sarah set out from this place to a place called Canaan. And when Abram was nearly 100 years old, he came to God and said, there's a bit of a small problem here because I've got no kids. So how am I going to be a great nation? And then in chapter 15, verses 5 and 6, it says, and he, that's God, brought him, Abram, he brought him outside and said, look toward heaven and the number of the stars, and if you're able to number them. And he said to him, so shall your offspring be. And he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness. And then if we come to Jesus, Jesus throughout the whole Bible shows his loving rescue plan and gives us choices for our sinful condition, to whether we believe or whether we're going to choose in his covenant or not. Okay, step number 2. To select the representative and the cutting of the sacrifice. In this process, in making a covenant, before the ceremony began, the tribes would choose a representative, someone who would represent them to make this covenant. And then they would also make a sacrifice. And they'll make the sacrifice to initiate the start of the making of this covenant. So maybe we can just do that for a sec. Can we have one representative from this tribe here? Who's going to represent here? Eugene. Okay, that was Eugene. Thanks, Eugene. And on this side here, who can we have as a representative here? Quickly, anybody, just say yes. Before I pick somebody, like Bill or Chris. Okay. All right, Chris is closer. Chris, no, don't worry, just stay there. You guys are just representative. That's fine. I'll call you up just now. All right. So we got our representatives, and then they would also cut the sacrifice. So here I have Larry the lamb. Sorry, Larry. Sorry about all this blood. All right, that was easy. So there's Larry the lamb. He's been sacrificed. So did this happen in the Old Testament too? Well, let's see about with Abraham in Genesis 15, verses 7 to 10. And he said to him, I am the Lord who has brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans, and to give you the land to possess. But he said, Oh God, how am I going to possess it? And he said to him, Bring me a heifer of 3 years old, a female goat, a ram of 3 years, a turtle dove, and a pigeon. And he bought these, and he cut them in half. And that is how they'll do a sacrifice, is they'll cut them from head to tail and put them blood side up and put the two sides on either side. So we'll keep this a family message for the kids here. They've just got a splitting headache. Okay. So bad. Okay. All right. In our new covenant, Jesus was our sacrifice. And there are many scriptures that give us that he is our new sacrifice. And I've just put some of them up on the screen there. So in John 1, verse 29, it says, "Look, the Lamb who takes away the sin of the world." In 1 Corinthians, Christ, our Passover Lamb, has been sacrificed. And as we hear prophesied in Isaiah chapter 53, verse 5, "But he was pierced for our rebellion, crushed for our sin. He was beaten so that we could be whole. He was whipped so that we could be healed." And then in this verse from 1 Peter, we often just read the last bit, that is, by his wounds we healed. But let's read the whole verse. It says, "He personally carried our sins in his body on the cross so that we can be dead to sin and alive to what is right. By his wounds we are healed." Okay, the next step, step 3. Step 3, the tribes would exchange a robe, their belt, and weapons. So with Abraham, his belief in God was counted to him as righteousness. And the robe is often referred to as a robe of righteousness. And like with the prodigal son, the robe is signified as restoration and identity. And isn't it just a lovely picture, just how the father went running up to embrace the son, and he took off his robe and he threw it around his son, and it was to restore him and to bring him back into the family. Jesus made, and then there's with our belt, and Jesus made himself vulnerable to Pilate and to the Pharisees many times in the New Testament. And our belt is also called the belt of truth. And if I didn't have my belt on, I'll be feeling a little vulnerable right now because I'll be scared my pants will fall down. So, and that is what our belt is like. It's the belt of truth. It's a thing that we're vulnerable before God with. And he holds it all together for us, especially when we're in times of vulnerability. And then there's our weapons. Our weapons, we often try to do things in our own strength with our own weapons, but we often need to take on God's weapon to help us through certain situations. Then the fourth step is the walk unto death. Doesn't that sound fun? Okay, the walk unto death. In this step, the pledge was fulfilled by the obligation of them walking. And there was no escape, no way out. Once you had done this walk unto death, it was like saying, "Do unto me as you do unto this animal." In maths, we have the infinity sign. And there we go, that infinity symbol. And it's like a figure of 8. It's a line that just doesn't end. And that infinity sign comes from it comes from the sign of it is to make a covenant. So can I just borrow Eugene and Chris quickly? Right. You guys are going to do the walk for us. Okay. So you guys start here back to back. And the hint is go forward and right. Okay. All right. This covenant is really starting as they're really like sussing each other out. Now Chris gets to see his tribe, and Eugene gets to see his tribe. So let's just do this walk quickly. So you guys are going to walk in a figure of 8 around the sacrifice. So forward and right. There we go. Here we go. All right. Thanks, guys. All right, and then you're going to end up here, facing each other. And isn't that just a beautiful picture? Just how, with a covenant, that you start facing away from each other, and that you end up facing each other. The same as it is with God, that we end up facing God. And Chris is on the side that he can see the other tribe, and Eugene can see the other tribe as well. Okay. All right, Lodi, thank you, guys. Well done, guys. Now, and that is what happens when we make a covenant with God, is we end up facing God. We turn around and we end up facing Him. So with Abraham obviously couldn't do this walk himself with God, but he had a terrifying dream. And in Genesis 15, verse 17, this is how God did the walk with him. So in this dream, it says, "And when the sun had gone down and it was dark, and behold, a smoking firepot and a flaming torch passed between these pieces." And that is how the walk was done with Abram. And with Jesus, what is Jesus' walk into death? Well, it started in the Garden of Gethsemane and ended on the cross. He endured the beating. He carried the cross through the streets of Jerusalem. He let go of himself and said, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And when his journey ended, he said, "It is finished." Jesus took this pledge seriously. He knew what the cost was and the internal implications of the covenant. Okay, step number 5. Step number 5 was to pronounce blessings and curses. The guys would stand in the middle of the sacrifice and they will pronounce blessings over each tribe, and they will pronounce curses. "Do unto me as to do unto this animal." The blessings were, they'll shout things like, "I pray abundant harvest over you. I pray for your safety, for good health, for numerous children." I think we're getting that right in CU. Okay. And when we look at Jesus, all through the Bible, there are scriptures in the Bible that shout out to us the promises of God. And if we just take one from Isaiah, where it will be like Jesus saying, "I will promise to restore what has been stolen. I will make you whole again. I will heal a broken heart. I will deliver the captives. I will recover sight to the blind, and I will set the oppressed free." Okay, not many steps to go. Step number 6 is a seal or a mark or the covenant. Unfortunately, you guys can relax in this one, because what the guys would do, who are the representatives, is they would normally make a cut in their wrist or hand, and then they'll do a handshake to mingle the blood, and they'll be left with a permanent scar as a reminder of this covenant that they have made. And what was this covenant with Abram? So with Abraham, the sign or the seal of the covenant was circumcision. And it says in chapter 17, verse 10, "This is my covenant which I shall keep between me and you and your offspring after you. Every male shall be circumcised, and you shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskins, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you. And he who is 8 days old from among you shall be circumcised." Don't worry, guys. Okay, so that was the sign of with Abram. What was the seal or or the marks with Jesus. With Jesus, it was the marks from the cross. It was the nails that went into his hands and his feet, and the spear that went into his side. And he has these permanent marks that are a sign of our covenant with him. And for us, the marks or the seal of the covenant is its circumcision of our heart. And we also have the seal of the Holy Spirit within us. Now on to the next beautiful step. Nearly done. 2 more to go. It's called the exchange of names. The exchange of names is more than just an external symbol. When you exchange names in a covenant, it's an exchange of personality, character, of reputation and authority. Like with Henry Morton Stanley, when he lifted up the spear, he carried something of that revered tribesman. And in Genesis chapter 17, verses 1 to 17, you can look it up. I'm not going to go through them. But I've just got a slide that shows just what God did for us. And it speaks about how Yahweh, the name of God, how he took out the fullest letter of the Hebrew alphabet. He took out the H, and he put it into Abram and to Sarai. And Abram became Abraham, and Sarai became Sarah. Okay, now the Messiah's term. What did he do for us in this step? So what is the condition of man? What crisis do we often go through? So I've got a list here of just some of the crises that as man we sometimes go through. Sometimes we're lacking, we're poor, we're indebted, we're shamed, tarnished, maybe a slave. Maybe we feel insignificant at times, unworthy or insecure. We're alone, lost, disappointed. Sometimes we're sick. Sometimes sickness even defines us. We get abandoned, defeated, like the vultures are circling and they're coming in to come and peck at us and take us away at any time. Sometimes we're anxious, we're fearful, or we worry. We're brokenhearted, we get crushed in spirit. Maybe we grieve sometimes when we lose a loved one, or sometimes we just feel trapped. So now let's look at the Hebrew names of God. How God takes those names that are on the left-hand side, and he puts his name in, and he makes that exchange with us. And how he takes his character, and he puts his name on top of us. So the things that we poor or lacking, he gives us his name of the Lord as my provider. When we feel shamed or tarnished, he is the Lord who sanctifies me. When we feel insignificant or insecure, he is a banner of love above me. When we are alone, lost or disappointed, the Lord is my shepherd. When we're defined by sickness, the Lord is my healer. When we're abandoned or forsaken or feel defeated, he is the Lord of hosts, the Lord of angel armies, and the battle belongs to the Lord. When we're anxious or fearful, the Lord is my peace. When we're brokenhearted, the Lord is near. When we feel we have sin or we feel trapped, the Lord is my righteousness. Isn't it just beautiful, just how God will take situations of our life and he says, here I am. Here I am. And he pours himself on us. And then the last step is the covenant meal. The final step, what the tribes would do is they would always celebrate the final step with a meal. And I'm going to go straight to Abraham, as his name is now, in chapter 18. And I'm just going to read a few verses from there. And it said, "And the Lord appeared to him in the oaks of Mamre, as he sat at the door of his tent in the heat of the day. He lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing there in front of him." Isn't it amazing? Those 3 men, like the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. "And he saw them, and they ran from the tent to meet them. And he bowed himself to the earth and said, 'O Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought to wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree, while I bring a morsel of bread.' And the Lord said, 'Surely I will return to you about this time next year, and Sarah your wife shall have a son.'" Doesn't this sound just like the Last Supper with Jesus? He washed the feet of the disciples, and he broke bread with them. It's so full of symbolism. And I want to close this message today just with a picture of marriage, because marriage symbolizes so many of these covenant steps. There's a courtship, there's a ceremony, there's the walking down in the aisle, the exchange of rings with the infinity sign. Promises are made with the exchange of vows. There's a cutting of a cake with a lot less blood. There's the exchange of names, and there's a wedding feast. Weddings are normally celebrated as one of the most beautiful things, and I'm going to share just a little bit of mine quickly. Maybe it's a guy thing, but I used to battle with being called the bride of Christ. But I had a greater understanding after my marriage. When Lorna walked down the aisle, I just remembered how beautiful she was and still is. She's the most beautiful woman in the world to me. And I know I was emotional just seeing this bride walk down the aisle. And the same is with God one day, with Jesus. He's going to be standing, welcoming his bride, knowing what his bride has endured through the trials of life. And he's going to be emotional as he sees his bride come forward. And there's going to be a celebration, and it's going to be a place with such joy and freedom. So let us remember we're in covenant with an eternal, all-knowing, all-powerful, gracious, loving King. It's a God who rescues us from death. It's a God who rescues us from an enemy. He's a God who even rescues us from ourselves. And I thought we could just maybe put up that slide with the names, and I can ask the musos to come up, the worship team, and maybe we can just sing a song and take some time just to go through that list and see if there's a time where you need to exchange one of those names. Amen.